Hello. So first I want to just check that everyone can hear me. I haven't used this type of mic before. Yes? OK, cool. Great. So yes, thank you, Mariko. My name is Natalia, and I'm a software engineer at The Guardian. I work on what we call the .com platform team. And for us, we're responsible for the website. We're responsible for the website as a whole, and we're also responsible for making sure that other engineers that work for The Guardian can contribute to the website. The most important things to us is making sure our website is fast, reliable, stable, and fun to work on. I also, that is not the slide I would have done. There you go. Apologies. So the AMP version of our article pages is one of the big things I've worked on since being at The Guardian, and my team is responsible for maintaining. OK, here we go. So as a short backstory, in October 2015, we joined a few other news organizations as a launch partner with Google to create some of the first AMP HTML pages. So today I'm going to cover a few of the difficulties we had when creating the AMP version of our articles. And this includes how we do onward journeys, and also how we actually had to change our header and navigation to fit the restrictions of AMP. I also wanted to spend some time today to talk about how we monitor our AMP pages for validation, and also some of the pros and cons in building the AMP version of our website. So first, I will start by mentioning that quite a few people in the past have asked me why we built our AMP pages, and subsequently whether they should build AMP pages as well. Well, as everyone knows, the biggest benefit of AMP is that it's fast. And the truth is, some websites, especially news websites, aren't as fast. Between constantly dealing with feature requests from editorial, between the drive and need to make money in an ever-changing climate, and also between feeling like, as all web developers do, the need to kind of catch up with all the latest advancements in web development, it's not that surprising that web pages can get out of hand. That said, our website is pretty fast. Malte, during a talk, said this: The Guardian, the only known media site where their non-AMP files are actually faster. Of course, this is loading the AMP file outside of Google search. Loading the same AMP page from Google search, where it could be pre-fetched and pre-rendered, it loads instantly. And for users coming to theguardian.com for the very first time, we would not be able to provide the same experience. This is why we're so keen in creating the AMP version of our website. We all know that the quicker an article loads, the more likely a user is to read the entire thing, the more that creates trust between the user and the website and the brand. And if the user trusts the website, they're more likely to engage in content in much more meaningful ways. Of course, when we started building our AMP pages, we ran into the same problems that a lot of people did. You end up asking yourself constantly, how do you do X without JavaScript? But obviously, the more you ask, the more you realize that you don't need JavaScript for a lot of things that you maybe thought you did. And actually, if you do find something that you can't do in AMP, as everyone said, the AMP team are super receptive. And the project is open source, so you can just get involved and contribute. So this is an example of something that we wanted to do on our website, or we wanted to do an AMP that we have on our website. We call these onward journeys at the bottom of the article. Here we show related content to the article, content in the section that the article is in, most viewed content across the website, and also curated sections from our front page. On our website, even though articles are cached for an hour, these onward journeys are updated far more frequently. For example, the most read stories, we take that data and it's real time, and so it actually changes quite a lot within that hour. And so for that reason, we couldn't include them in our AMP pages originally. So we suggested a way for us to be able to have these onward journeys on AMP. And the AMP team were great. They took on the feedback that we provided and made something that was immediately useful. AMP list and AMP mustache was what was created, and actually we use them a lot in our pages. So another big problem that we had when converting our article pages to AMP pages was our geo-based editions. In our cache, we actually have 4 versions of every article. These are our 4 geo-based editions. We have UK, US, Australia, and international. The header is slightly different. The navigation is different. We replace certain sections and links with words that make more sense depending on where you are. So for example, football and soccer. And without being able to serve different versions of the same article from the cache, like we do on our website, there was absolutely no way to replicate our navigation on AMP. But we took the challenge and tried to come up with something better instead. We also did some research while we did this, and what we found is that users that were unfamiliar with the Guardian brand actually saw a page like this one and didn't even realize that we were a news organization at all. They often think that we write about science. So clearly this isn't doing enough for our branding anyway. So yes, this was the first iteration of our simplified nav. It's the first nav that we had on AMP. And even though it is a lot simpler, we actually found that it did a much better job of explaining our brand to first-time users. It also simplified our offering to ignore the problem that we couldn't have a different nav per geo-based edition. And the truth of the matter is we really ended up liking our simple nav. It solved a lot of problems for us. And it was just simple. But we still needed a way to show a menu, and we couldn't do that without a way to show a different menu per geo-based edition. So again, we explained this to the AMP team, and they provided us a way. Thankfully, they didn't call it Expando, as we suggested, but instead included it in their AMP sidebar component that they were already working on. So now we can use an AMP list inside of an AMP sidebar to fetch the menu. For most users, we can get their location from their IP and use that to inform which geo-based edition to serve from. But many of our users have very specific preferences with us for what geo-based edition they want to be served. And on our website, we store that information in a cookie. And we can send cookies across with the request from our AMP pages by using this credentials attribute. We can send cookies because even though we are serving from a non-Guardian page, on the Google CDN, for example, we request a Guardian page which has access to the same cookies as our website does. The Guardian page in this case is amp.theguardian.com. So if a user has a preference, we serve them that geo-based edition. Otherwise, we give them something based on the location of their IP. So once that was in place, we started working on a redesign for our menu. And this is what it ended up looking like. Content in the menu is fetched when the burger is clicked. And that content is based on the user's location. The content is then sorted from most popular to least popular. And what goes into those lists are largely editorially defined. So what we have learned from AMP has actually led to a massive redesign on our website as well. As you can see, it looks pretty similar. Thanks to our discoveries on AMP, users who are unfamiliar with us are now much more likely to know of us as a news organization. In fact, based on the UX research that we did afterwards, people in the US who are unfamiliar with the Guardian brand, people who saw this navigation were 3 times more likely to recognize us as a news site. As a warning, if you go on theguardian.com now to see this header, only about 10% of users on mobile will see it. It should be rolled out to 100% fairly soon, but that will most likely wait until I am back in London. So apologies. Yeah, so we're always monitoring how our AMP pages perform. And we're always comparing that with how our mobile web pages perform as well. And it's a big goal of ours on the website to make sure that we keep iterating and making changes to both based on what we find. So the next big problem that we had on our AMP pages was making sure that they just continuously validated. There are 2 main ways we have found that we might break an AMP page. For us, those are developer errors and journalist errors. I'll go through how we deal with both, but I will first focus on the easiest one to fix, which is developer errors. I'm sure a message like this looks quite familiar to anyone who is an AMP developer. It is definitely something we used to see a lot. So how we built AMP is we've made it part of our website. We don't have another tech stack to support AMP, and instead have chosen our current stack to do it instead. So this means that if you request an article from our website normally, we would get the content from our content API, and we'd render it as you see here. For AMP, you just have to change the URL. The same content is fetched, but the markup is different. Once we started supporting AMP, we realized that if you implement something on our website, you also have to implement a slightly different version for AMP as well. For example, you can't just embed a YouTube video. You have to embed an AMP YouTube component. Even iframes need to become AMP iframes and might have different restrictions on them than we would normally have. So given that, you can imagine how easy it might be to break an AMP page. An example of this is on May 27th last year, we actually invalidated all of our AMP pages by adding the Facebook Messenger share button to them. This was added to both AMP pages and non-AMP pages, and the developer assumed that it would be fine because it was just a button. And it did seem like a fairly innocent change, to be fair. As it turns out, support for the Facebook Messenger protocol hadn't been whitelisted on AMP pages quite yet. Support for the project had actually been added to the GitHub project 2 days before this, but it hadn't yet been released into production. So in other words, we're about 2 weeks early to make this change. And this is what it did to our AMP page validation. Yeah. The blue line indicates AMP index pages, and the red line shows index errors. You can see where the errors started to spike, where it's clear that something went wrong. And you can also see where we fixed it, and things started regulating back to normal. So to prevent this from happening again, we started using the AMP HTML validator NPM module. And we added a set of Scala integration tests that could easily be run locally and in our CI. These are run on every pull request that is made to our project, and after every merge to master before deploying into production. For these tests, the validator runtime is fired up in a separate process and uses a headless browser to load up content for validation. These tests run on a static list of articles, and we add that list every time we implement a new feature on the article pages or every time we fix a bug. So this helps catch most of our developer-introduced errors and definitely helps avoid regression. But that only covers developer-introduced errors of a developer introducing code to our repository. But we have found that we can break AMP in other ways. So an example of this is during our HTTP to HTTPS migration. We were most of the way there, but we were stuck on one of our most important editorial sections, politics. On quite a few of our UK politics articles, we embed videos of the official UK Parliament TV, which happens to be an insecure source. Because this was important to our journalism, we had to be able to continue to serve those videos and articles until we found a solution, at least. So that it didn't hold up our progress in other areas, we wrote a rule in our CDN configuration to redirect all politics traffic to the HTTP version of theguardian.com. The result of this is that we actually redirected all AMP traffic on the politics section to the HTTP non-AMP version of the site. The result of this was another massive drop in AMP traffic. After this experience, we, of course, set up another set of tests. We created a Node.js utility which runs against production on an hourly schedule and in our CI. If it fails, we look into it straight away. We do expect any problems we see here to be looked at and fixed immediately. So that covers most of the developer-introduced errors, but it still doesn't really help us catch validation errors that might be caused by a journalist doing something unexpected. The truth is, right now, we have limited control over what a journalist might embed into the page, for example. And an example of this breaking AMP is on one of our live blogs, when very popular live blogs stop receiving AMP traffic. So on the single biggest traffic day of the year, and actually I've been told this is the single biggest traffic day we've had ever, a journalist embedded what we call an interactive atom at the top of the main live blog covering the US election results. If it had been anywhere else on the page, it would have been fine, because it was automatically changed into a resizable AMP iframe. Unfortunately, this was in the first screen of the page and within 600 pixels from the top of the page, breaking a rule in AMP and thus invalidating this live blog. This is how that affected our AMP traffic that day. The green shows our traffic to AMP, and the gray is our traffic to the website on a mobile device. Even though we still had amazing traffic that day, most of it was to that particular live blog, and it would have otherwise been on AMP if it hadn't been invalid. So to help us catch these errors just a little bit sooner, using the same Node.js utility I mentioned before, we also have an option that fetches the top 50 most read articles from our in-house real-time traffic tool. And that list is then run against the validator. If errors appear, again, we fix them as soon as possible. So for this article, if we'd had this in place then, we would have caught this error sooner and be able to, and would have put a fix in place. So the last thing we've done to help catch errors is set up alerts on our AMP traffic. If traffic drops below a certain point, we assume there is an issue and then work to fix it as soon as possible. This is a last resort, though, and we've actually found that since putting the rest of our tests in place, we haven't actually had these alerts go off. And let's hope that continues. So at the end of the day, as mentioned, we have limited control over what a journalist might embed. And as soon as an article is published, it is then accessible on the website and therefore on AMP as well. We have new content appearing every minute, and so if it doesn't make its way into our top 50, we might not notice an error at all. Because this isn't ideal, what we've discussed doing is actually utilizing our preview service that our CMS uses to check whether or not an unpublished article might validate on AMP. To be clear, this would never stop someone from publishing that article. But what it would mean is that we could have a real-time status on how our unpublished articles would be doing on AMP. And we might even get a chance to fix some errors before they happen. But regardless of how we find AMP errors, there are a lot of things that could potentially break AMP. And we do have to be pragmatic with what we fix. We currently only focus on errors on a large number of pages, and of course, errors on popular pages. And we do ignore older content completely. So to summarize, the main two ways which we might break an AMP page is either by a developer doing something or a journalist doing something. If it is a developer, we have tests which run on every PR and a cron job against production, which catch most of these errors. For journalist-introduced errors, we currently only run validation against our top 50. However, in the future, we would like to track the latest errors from pre-published content. So when someone asks me whether they would want to build an AMP page, I do try to be really honest with them and tell them exactly how it was for us. So though AMP is a great thing, there are costs associated with it. First, there's the initial setup cost. This is the time you either have to spend creating a new stack to serve your AMP pages, or add it to your existing stack, which is what we've done. After, there's the continued developer cost. Every time a new feature is added, it will either need to be excluded from AMP or specifically added to AMP. And each new developer who works on the project has to then learn about AMP and the restrictions to develop on it properly. And of course, there is a general maintenance cost. To be fair, there's almost always a maintenance cost for every new piece of work. And AMP does add complexity to our project, and we do need to do more to compensate for how easy it is to break. It is also a goal of ours to keep our project up to date with the newest advancements in the AMP HTML project. But despite all these costs, we still think AMP is a good thing for us, and for all the reasons mentioned before. Ensuring our users can access our content and providing a good user experience for them are two of the most important things that we do. So, AMP versus The Guardian. Yeah, it's not really that. It's much more AMP at The Guardian. And I really just wanted to take some time to share some of the metrics of how our AMP pages are doing. So first, where does AMP traffic come from? Well, unsurprisingly, the main source of AMP traffic comes from Google Search. Over the past week, 74.8% of our traffic came from Google Search, to be exact. Other sources include Newsstand, Google News, Twitter, and Facebook. This is all our traffic, mobile traffic from Google Search in the past 12 months. The massive spike in this graph you actually saw before, it was right after the US election when we were showing the results. So AMP accounts for roughly 60% of all Google-referred mobile traffic. It is a bit higher in the US and UK, and a bit lower for the rest of the world. As you can see, AMP has been slowly taking over our mobile web traffic, and we expect this might increase even more as there are more platforms that are starting to support AMP. And we are continuously working to make sure more of our content types are available by AMP as well. So we found that AMP links in Google Search have a roughly 2% higher click-through rate. We haven't validated for sure why this might be for us, but we do think it's possible that some users are more likely to click on an AMP page because they know it is guaranteed to be faster. More and more users seem to be recognizing the lightning bolt as a symbol for Facebook Instant Articles and AMP, and potentially know it's just less of a risk to click that link. They know the page will load instantly. Once on an AMP page, users show an 8.6% overall higher click-through rate to a second page on theguardian.com. This is mostly because of the onward journeys that we have at the bottom of the page. One of the reasons why this is because we do show more stories there, and we do show more of a breadth of options as well. There's also less merchandising and other things to click on at the bottom of the page. This was intentional because for us, the big part of AMP was to drive people to the website, where then we have teams who work on dealing with loyalty between users. And so for us, this is a great thing. Oops. Advertising revenue. For the most part, ad revenue is pretty similar between AMP and our mobile web. For those in the audience who might not know, CPM, or cost per 1,000 impressions, is a marketing term used to denote the cost of 1,000 ad impressions on a website. So for us, the price of 1,000 ad impressions on our mobile web is quite similar to that on AMP. On average, over all our regions, our AMP CPM is within 5% of each other. Regarding ad viewability, even though we also lazy load ads on our website, we have found that AMP actually does show the ads slightly sooner, and so we do have a greater ad viewability on AMP than we do on our mobile web. So most other aspects of our AMP page perform in quite a comparable way to our website. And our two biggest problems, geo-based editions of our articles and AMP validation, both turned out to be quite surmountable problems. And as for advice I give people when they ask whether or not they should create AMP pages as well, of course I mention the validation issues and potential costs. And of course I mention, needlessly, that AMP is fast and all the benefits that can come from that. For example, more trust between the website and the user. But I also talk about how AMP can be good in some more unexpected ways. For us, we have found that, that AMP provided this amazing opportunity for us to improve our mobile web articles. Through the restrictions of AMP, we actually worked to simplify our article pages and create something that was immediately more useful to users. And even from the beginning, our goal was never about replicating theguardian.com on AMP, but instead about creating something new. And actually, through that process, we've actually now changed our non-AMP mobile web to be better as well. Thanks for listening.